So hi guys, I see most of you are here, missing Duha and Hasiba. So anyway, I think you have received email from us. This is the final review, the 8th week tutorial, and then here are the slots. And the time management, we want you to keep to 10 to 12 minutes for your presentation. And then you will have 20 minutes to receive feedback from tutors. And then I think during the feedback session, I think the tutor, like your main tutor, should maybe just try to do the timekeeping for your studio, and then all other tutors should try to provide some constructive feedback before the students start their production in the following weeks. And then we will have a final session, final presentation in early January. Yeah. So we want you to go through or talk about your research process, design process, any initial thoughts and concepts, and then finally your design proposal or intervention for the project. Yeah. Any last questions, or we are good to start? I guess we are good. Okay, and just checking with Herman. Are we recording now?
Yeah.
And Ben is here, right? Ben, hello.
Hi. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so I guess we are ready to go. You're up, Mason.
Yep. So can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, everyone. I'm Mason. I'm in DR10, and this is kind of my mid-sem review because I start the class late. So our topic is about transience. So here I define transience as an act of staging the present. Is more like a performance. And the conversation starts with this kind of set of drawings. When I realized that people these days are more driven by the images of something rather than the actual contents. So you can see the examples here. And then what if this kind of attitude towards things applied to a city? So the city is more like a facade displaying a lot of positive stuff and trying to conceal some of the problems or issues, try to hide them behind the facade. So that what if we treat city as a stage of performance? And then since I'm living in Melbourne and it used to be the most livable city, it's kind of a brand that it possessed for a long time. But that kind of ranking has dropped since 2018. Partially because of the pandemic, but a lot of the reason behind is actually some kind of chronic issues behind that pretty facade of most livable city. And that's the background. And for those who didn't know, Melbourne is a city relying heavily on foreign input, like international students or tourism for its economic growth. And the close of border hit really hard on this city. And what's suffering from this kind of lockdown stuff is the student housing agency, the local retails, and the tourist agency. But also this kind of quarantine, this kind of cooling down present a opportunity for the city to rebrand, to trying to reevaluate, try to reposition itself, maybe to try to create a new image for the next phase of development. And it's time to face some of its issues, as I mentioned before, such as extreme weather, overloaded public facilities, traffic congestion.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Unemployment and low affordability of housing. A bit of history. In the past, like Melbourne has suffered from the kind of like economic crisis before, and then it was an opportunity, and then like Melbourne took it like to transition a CBD into a CAD, so that like the center of the city is no longer like business center, but more like a residential center. So that kind of change introduce a lot of population to the city and also activate the CBD. So I'm thinking in this stage, like after a pandemic, it's also an opportunity to rebrand the entire city, not only to recover, but also to try to bring it into the next stage. And some research into the most livable city, like this kind of ranking, it's by EIU, the Economic Intelligence Unit. And this is the result this year. So you can, no, this is the result from 2018. So Melbourne used to be the first one, but the second, and then now the 8th. So this page is a bit busy, but this is the Melbourne ranking this year. And then how the most livable city was ranked, was like evaluated. It's through these 5 categories. And Melbourne loses itself to like other cities, majority on like healthcare, stability and cultural. It maintains like all right for education and infrastructure. So we'll dive into these 3 categories to see like what really is going on that drags Melbourne like down. So these 3 areas, like research a bit about the Melbourne's background, like of like what's the issues hidden behind the facade. I will not go into like each one, but yeah, here's some of the like long-term issues. But out of all those one of the big problem is that Melbourne is growing at an unsustainable pace. It's like the population growth is too fast, and then the infrastructures is like fail to keep up with the population growth, and hence the mask of the most livable city falls. And then yeah, it's time for Melbourne to rebrand. And a lot of people are relieved because of Melbourne is no longer the most livable city, because it's kind of like it's not real. And yeah, along with my own experience, like living in this city, it's not that perfect. Here are some of the like the most critical issues I've experienced in Melbourne. So first one is uneven distribution of facilities. Like the CBD and the suburb is totally different. And there's a lot of protests going on CBD, which is like occupying the street, and then like it's heavily influenced impacts on our normal life for like citizens in Melbourne, and also paralysis caused by some kind of extreme weather events, such like strong wind, heat wave, and then like you can remember before the pandemic, it's like the bushfire. So what Melbourne need is kind of like an improved infrastructure in this case, and then reallocation of spaces for this kind of democratic events, and also it needs to like build some climate resilient infrastructures. So Melbourne is a big city, and then I'm trying to allocate like my project in a specific site. So I look at this kind of accessibility diagram. It's another ranking. And I find this kind of white spot here. It's like really underpopulated, but it's so close to the center of Melbourne city. And then this kind of area here is called Fisherman's Bend. It's kind of next to the river. It shares the same river with the CBD or CAD of Melbourne. So we are looking at the area here. A bit zoom in. So currently here it's a bit of like industrial site. It's a bit underdeveloped, and it was the port for shipment for cargoes like to come in. And approximately like near it, it's like this ring is more like some other industry like factory site, and then here's the busy CBD, and also where people work, live. And there's 3D of it. You can see like the height difference is like pretty obvious here. It's like totally flat in this kind of area, so it's like it's a good opportunity here to like trying to be a new zone for development. And here's some aerials of that site. It's a bit isolated now, but I think due to its like geographic location is pretty important to the city. It can be a gateway to the city if you treat it well. And here are some of like the human street perspective of what's going on there. Some kind of like demolished factories, unused grounds, and then some redevelopment of those kind of factory topology into like shopping, into like into some retails. And so going back to, sorry, it's a bit random jump here. Going back to like what kind of like the story or literature or narrative we can borrow from to kind of guide this kind of process of redeveloping Melbourne. So I went to research a bit about the movie Synecdoche in New York. It's about a director who's trying to make sense of his life, and then he built a replica of New York in a warehouse. So this kind of act is more like it's trying to make sense of everything and trying to control things and trying to contain stuff by replicating the real world. And interesting stuff happening inside warehouse when like the actors sometimes become the directors, and the director sometimes becomes the actor being directed. So in the movie, the director is called Caden. He has written hundreds of notes for the performers to perform or improvise in their like separated stages. And in parallel to those written notes in the city, in an urban setting, those are the tags, like the first thing I show in this presentation, the tags or the images people are chasing after. So that can be the kind of method I used to generate architecture. And here's the narrative flow of that story, how the director lived a really like hard life in reality and tried to make sense of everything. So when he gets the awards, gets the money, so he ran a warehouse and trying to build an entire stage set of New York inside that warehouse, and then his play expand, and to the end, like it's becoming like infinite chain of replicas. So it's like play in a play in a play. And here are some of the themes for in that movie. Like first is the replica, and the second is like how the small thing can reveal the entire city. So that's kind of like the image or the brand we're building for. So people are chasing after that brand instead of the content itself. And decay and dying, delusion, it's more like deceiving people of like what's really fascinated about Melbourne, but not showing them the negative side of it. And yeah, so this is how I like some kind of like initial collages. I explored how the tags on Instagram, on social media, how those are transformed into the image of a person, and hence like an image of a city, and then how that tag has been like changed during the past few years, and then into something more like volatile. And then here on the like bottom right is the scene in movie, how the director has written so many notes, so that they're trying to direct the act of his play, of his theatrical practice. And here it's about like getting to the end of like the research is like here's something going on in Melbourne. It's the actual example. I'm thinking how we can turn this kind of performance or stage inside out, so that it's not contained in a certain like facility, but it's more like exposed in the facade as something that's like people can see. So it's like turning containment to exposure. And what this collage showed is this site here. It's somewhere in Melbourne called Dockland, and it's like out of this kind of highly developed cityscape. Some skyscrapers at the background, some residential, high-rise residentials in the background, but this kind of really old, really like weird off, really rough warehouse in the middle of the quay, the harbor. So what's really going on in that thing? So that's the location where those kind of two warehouses are. And then when people pass by, also when I passed by, I was wondering what is going on in this kind of warehouse, why this thing appeared in the city. But after I do some research, it's actually it turned into a disco at night basically. So it's it contains the most popular activities in the city, and it can turn into this kind of very live performance, and where people can enjoy life. So yeah, that inspired me a lot. How can this kind of abandoned infrastructure or abandoned site be turned into this kind of facade or mask, to present the city's kind of prosperity and try to attract more people to come in. Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. This is some kind of initial collage I've done before to imagine what the architecture is like for a stage city as a stage set. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Even without script, you are at 12 minutes mark. Very good.
Okay.
Good.
Yep. Oh, can't see your faces.
Let's wait a few seconds. Let's see. Maybe I can just start with a few questions. So did you guys, I think when this studio first started, introduced this topic, I remember Burning Man was mentioned, right? That there was example or case study for celebrating the transients. And did you also look at festivals or other staging or events like that in Melbourne?
Yeah, actually Melbourne is a city of festivals almost every day, and that can be a mask as well. Yeah.
I think that's interesting though, because you said something right at the very end of your project that I think you could further explore, which is Melbourne City has a growing population of spaces that are being abandoned, and your case study is one of a warehouse. It might be interesting to locate other abandoned spaces. They don't necessarily have to be abandoned. They can be just disused, unloved, not very well populated. And then your project becomes basically the rationale is post-COVID, people are going to want to start feeling good about themselves and spending more time outdoors, and where they can start to populate rather than being in the CBD, but being in the central activities district, are in these spaces, XYZ, because they're not used for anything particular. And so the festivals and pop-up venues and all of these activities that are very inherent to Melbourne can start populating. And then your project picks one of them, in this case, the warehouse, and explains how the architecture that you're proposing as a designer can facilitate this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the research. I was just wondering, which direction you're going to take your project towards. I was imagining, at some point, I was thinking, are you curating a parade or organizing a festival on a certain date of the year in Melbourne and make it into sort of a movement? But I kind of got lost with the message or the Can you maybe elaborate a bit on that, turning the staging inside out, and how do you imagine that will
so yeah
play in the city?
So yeah, I'm still thinking about how to transition from this kind of narrative into the actual architecture. But because like since before we're talking about masks, talking about facades, talking about like delusions. So if those things are all contained, like all hidden behind the wall, then nobody will know. So what about like we turn that inside out so that show all of those kind of things in say facades. Facades no longer just like a flat surface, but more like infrastructure, so where people can have activities on, so that like the street can perceive it as like something's going on, like that kind of image presented to the public. Otherwise, it's all like hidden behind that kind of very muted facade. Yeah, not just like a warehouse for like address all those activities, but also like this kind of a skin of a.
Because I basically see I'm seeing two slightly different projects. So one project, which you were just talking about, is this idea. There's a book called Phantom Architecture, and it's been discussed for a very long time, where buildings eventually got to such a large size that you could no longer understand visually what was supposed to be going on inside as it once was. So that's one project. And then there's a commentary on Melbourne there. Then the second project is a very humanistic project, which is talking about all of the things that we value and share and think about and need to appreciate in our cities in order to live. And you can marry the two. And I think one way that you could do so is if you created a sequence of images, maybe, between 3 and 6 images, like the one you have on the screen, but from a first person perspective, from the eyes of an individual living in the city. You'll then ground your project, because there's a lot of research, and I buy the research, but it becomes very difficult to jump from the research to a design proposition, because you're not yet dealing with space. So I think one thing that you could do is storyboard, like a day in the life of a person in Melbourne attending a festival, and do it as if you've taken a photograph, and whatever it is you see or you believe to be seeing in that photograph, you should draw it, all the architectural elements, anything related to societal interactions, activities, etc., etc. And then once you have all of those 6 in place, so, like they wake up, what do I see? They go outside for the first time, what do I see? They go to the first public square, what do I see? Etc., etc. Then you can create an exact same sequence of images. You copy and paste it and put it beneath itself. And you start to draw in the space outside of what you have drawn, all of that stuff that you were talking about, the phantom architecture, the stuff that you don't get to see. So if in the image that you collaged, you're looking, down a street and it just looks like a neighborhood, and then there's a warehouse to your left, in the second sequence of images, you can start to draw what actually is happening inside that warehouse off screen, if that makes sense. And then your project becomes a commentary on both, and we get what we really want as architects, which is architecture, some type of physical intervention, a design, and then your whole project works really well together.
Yeah.
That's just one way I think you could do it.
Yeah, actually, Alan, that's more like different stages, right? It's like almost like Mason is writing a brief, or creating a set of conditions and create a new festival in the city of Melbourne. And at the same time, Mason is also the participating architect. He's going to design one of the key, I'm just calling it pavilion for now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting because, as designers, we crave both the information and some type of form. And I think you've got all the information necessary. You just need to ground it in some type of design proposal. And how you choose to visualize that design proposal is entirely up to you. But we do need to start seeing some type of proposal, because then it becomes really easy to discuss the relationship between the proposal and your research.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it is. seems it's quite important to ground the research as well.
But can you zoom into that page, the one with all of those little people? Yeah. Yeah, so like this is like a day in the life of almost. Kind of what I'm imagining. Maybe not quite, maybe a bit too zoomed into the daily life, but
A bit of the street like surroundings, what he or
yeah,
she.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like
Mhm.
if that girl wearing the hat is there's a building behind her. I don't know what it is, but actually that looks like a portal now that I think about it. But like there's a building behind her, and in the first image, it just looks like any other building that you might find. But if you then start to if that image were on a page by itself, and then you start to illustrate your design behind it, you know, off the I'm saying off screen, but it's not. It's like, can I draw on here?
Can annotate
View
that.
options. How do you annotate?
In the bar, like next to.
View options. Annotate. There we go. Okay, so if this were on a page by itself, right? And then then you decide, actually, you know what? In the image, it's talking about facelessness. We don't actually know what the architecture looks like anymore, but then you start to draw your design. Maybe it's like a wireframe, whatever it might be. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm just drawing it as a cube because I'm on my Mac. But then you start to talk about what's actually happening inside, but you don't actually know, because all we get to see as a person who walks on the street is that. But the reality is there's so much that's happening behind the door, behind the screen.
Yep.
And then your project becomes potentially about it. What happens inside, yeah, fine, it's important, but maybe not as important as the facade. So your project might be about, you know, bridging between the public realm and whatever is happening inside. Or you might just say, actually, it's a commentary, it's a white wall. I want to force people inside, but that's up to you to decide. So I understood all of your research, but I think there are a lot of directions it could potentially go into, as we've discussed with David as well. So you need to pick carefully what elements of your narrative you want to carry forward, and then marry them in some type of design proposal.
Yeah.
It can be an interesting methodology.
I think the idea of festival is really interesting, actually, and also the fact that Mason, you mentioned how Melbourne is always like a city of festivals. I think it might be also worth looking into this culture of festival in Melbourne. So, you know, what kind of festival are there, and you can even be more precise with, you know, when is this festival going to be happening? What's the duration of it? So even your architecture can be quite transient as well. You know, like it doesn't have to be, you know, there forever, but you're actually designing something that will disappear after a certain period of time. So I think you know, that's really sort of interesting. And also I think the other thing is you mentioned lockdown, and you sort of talk about how lockdown actually bring a negative impact to the economic of the city. And I'm just thinking, you know, can your festival, instead of actually solving the issues that lockdown brings, but actually looking into how you can embrace lockdowns, because you talk a lot about the livability index. And one of the criteria is all about, you know, environment, pollution, and, you know, etc. But one of the benefits that lockdown brings is also because it suspends all the traffic. So it actually, you know, cleans up the air and all that. So it's not entirely a bad thing. So I'm just wondering, you know, can your project be almost like a festival, and by embracing the idea of lockdown to sort of regenerate the city of Melbourne? So instead of, you know, seeing lockdown, quarantine as a negative aspect, but actually embracing it and to celebrate it in order to sort of revitalize the city. Yeah. I think that might be quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And Mason, I think I want to challenge you a little bit on your presentation. Mm, maybe I think you have the research skills, right? But maybe in the following weeks, you can think of a way like how you can present your body of research, the design thoughts and proposal. Could it be a video or could it be any other format rather than like you're here and trying something new, right? You want to do something different, slightly different, maybe like more unconventional, like staging. If you're going to make a camera and film yourself and things like that. Be a bit more experimental with your presentation. I think that can also bring an extra layer to this project.
Yeah, I was planning to do some like collages to show those kind of like boring data. If I have time, sure.
No. Yeah, if you have time, it's not boring data. I think they're quite important and kind of makes sense. It supports your research as well. I think all the tutors here are comfortable looking at data like that. But it's just like a different way of doing research. Research doesn't need to be like, writing an essay or, it can be something different.
Yeah,
you need to pace yourself and work with your tutors. Let's see.
Sure.
Okay. I also want to throw in some comments. I think the research is good. The basis of the narrative is strong. And I agree with all the tutors. The next stage is to try to translate this into architecture. And I think looking at the city as the stage set is a very good starting point. And I would definitely start to look at the kind of movie sets or reality TV shows like Australia's Got Talent, where you have the central stage and also the audience. And sometimes in those shows, sometimes the audience becomes part of the show where it's interactive. And I would almost see this flipping inside of out and the outside as a series of interactive designs that are body scale, and between these designs that populate the urban city, each of the pods can see other pods. So these mini cells or series of installations become interactive with each other. And it also turns an experience which is from the body scale, from inside a small structure, into like a bigger structure in the urban scale. So I think you might want to be a little bit more ambitious than just a warehouse. And I think it will also benefit from having different height differences around the city of Melbourne to create the kind of different views from different spots and installations around the city. And it also plays into the idea of being transient, where you have a series of temporary or contemporary or organic structure, and it keeps on evolving. Maybe the structure changes a little bit as people use them. So it sort of becomes like an animal where you have bits of cells around the city, and it keeps on evolving when someone's using them, updating them, and also replacing with new cells. And that also, just plays into the idea of having a social distancing, like social bubbles inside the installations. It could be living space, like how Ivan suggested it. It could be a virtual experience, but at the same time, you can see how other people are interacting with the virtual space in the physical world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. During the research, I bumped into a book about how the actual society is actually a performance, like a stage. So everybody is performing every day. It's just they unconscious. They're wearing masks, like literal, not literal, and metaphorically, the masks, like trying to keep a stable presence of himself or herself. And how that kind of like very local, very individual kind of act of wearing masks can be applied, like, or flipped to like a city thing.
Yeah, I feel like a good starting point for this project onwards could be looking at a series of almost like making a catalog for body scale experiences installations, and then you start to think about once you have all the items that you want to include, you can start to think about the strategy of populating them in the city.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also one final point is just to think about, okay, if you're doing this project for the city, so is it going to be a government project or is it going to be run by the communities? So who's going to run this project? Who's going to fund it? The reason I'm saying this is because whoever you sort of, the clients that you're doing this project for actually have a very big influence of how the project outcome will be. So let's say if it is like a community project, then the material, the sort of language of the project that you will be designing will be totally different, because maybe it's almost like a the material can also be almost like household materials that brought out from the community. So in a way, the construction process is also to empower the community. But if it's like a government project, then the language would be completely different. You might actually have more sort of high technology, more advanced architecture. So I think the whole point is like to think about, who is this project for? Is it for the city, or is it for the people, or is it for the government, or is it for like a certain organization in the city? Yeah. So that will help you to sort of establish your position in the project as well. Yeah.
Protagonist.
Exactly.
Okay, then let's end the discussion here, and then we will invite Paul to talk